Day Sylvie here with the Great White North Report. So it's been days since the Canadian election, and waiting for the dust to all settle. All the votes are in, everything's been counted twice, and the Liberals will need to make a list and see who's going to play nice. So anyway, after a grim campaign, Trudeau emerges damaged but victorious, according to CBC post here, and he's promising to govern for everyone after winning a minority government. Now, are minority governments a bad thing? Not necessarily. A lot of things have been done with a minority government, and the last one we had was with Stephen Harper, and he did it twice at 2-year stretches, and he was pretty effective at doing it. This is where you find out how much political savvy you actually have. As far as the election results go, it's pretty much how I predicted it. I predicted a Liberal minority government. The other parties, unless they form an unlikely, unholy alliance, will have to deal with the Liberals. One of the key areas for the Liberals was the Atlantic provinces. They didn't sweep it this time like they did last time. But of the 32 seats up for grabs in the Atlantic provinces, they took 26. 4 went to the Conservatives, 1 went to the Greens, and 1 went to the NDP. The Conservatives got all theirs in New Brunswick and 1 in Nova Scotia. Well, the NDP got theirs in Newfoundland, and the Greens also got theirs in New Brunswick. PEI went totally red again. So the Liberals lost ground, but they built up a substantial lead, moving into the main provinces of Quebec and Ontario. The Liberals took some losses, but they win enough seats in Quebec and Ontario to form the minority government. Toronto really helped the Liberals, and the Liberals really swept most of Toronto. I think only 3 seats went to the Conservatives. The NDP were completely shut out of the Greater Toronto region, and that helped the Liberals gain enough seats to get that minority government, because they didn't win much else after that. The NDP weren't able to do much in Quebec and lost most of the seats they had gained. The Bloc Québécois made a big comeback, and even the Conservatives made a comeback in Quebec. Now the Conservatives, they pretty much swept Alberta and Saskatchewan and finished with second in seats. We'll get to that in a minute. And the NDP, they did best out in BC. So I found this one on Wikipedia. This gives a breakdown of all the ridings and all the seats. The darker the color, the more the area voted. So they got the riding listings, and the Liberals really did well in Newfoundland. The NDP took that one little seat. Going to PEI, they were predominantly Liberal. Nova Scotia, again, predominantly Liberal, with 1 Conservative area that just scraped by. And you jump into New Brunswick, and they also, most of the seats went Liberal, with the 3 Conservative and the 1 Green Party seat. So the NDP didn't really do well, didn't make any inroads on the East Coast. And you go to Quebec, and it's kind of interesting that the Bloc Québécois are predominant in the northern parts of Quebec. I would think that they would be less separatist than the rest. The Conservatives made some inroads in the eastern townships. I always thought that was the heavy Bloc Québécois area. You can see that the city of Montreal, they went pretty much all Liberal, with 1 NDP seat, and the surrounding townships were all mostly Bloc Québécois. Quebec City was predominantly Conservative, with a couple of Liberal seats and Bloc Québécois seats. I was again surprised by that. I always consider Quebec City to be where the Bloc Québécois has a stronghold, and surprised that the Liberals took parts of the Richelieu Valley as well. Then you go to Ontario, and you can see that the rural parts of southwestern Ontario are predominantly Conservative. So southwestern Ontario from 119, 160, 117 up into the Ottawa Valley. The Ottawa Valley, Ottawa-Gatineau was predominantly Liberal, while the eastern townships of Ontario, out in Kingston, were Conservative, with the Kingston area being Liberal. So it seems like the Liberals, they own the urban vote. So you can see Toronto. Toronto was just all Liberal, with a couple of Conservative ridings in there. And then the Conservatives had the outlying regions. London, Ontario went Liberal with NDP. Kitchener-Waterloo went Liberal. Hamilton went Liberal NDP. The Niagara region was Conservative with some Liberal ridings. And for the most part, it's all Conservative. Windsor, NDP Liberal. And then as you move into northwestern Ontario, you see that the NDP have and the Liberals start to rally, with the Conservatives winning the last one. Manitoba is interesting because they went and they had a huge NDP region as well as Nunavut, and then they went conservative, heavy conservative. Like District 96 is almost totally conservative. But the Liberals managed to snag some seats in Winnipeg. The NDP did too. But then when you go to Saskatchewan and Alberta, it is definitely blue to the point where it's almost black. And this is where the Conservatives really picked up steam and started getting close, inching closer. Edmonton was conservative except for one NDP stronghold. Calgary, conservative to the core. Regina, conservative to the core. Saskatoon, conservative to the core. Then you go to BC. This is where the Conservatives started to falter. The interior of BC, they won big. But then this is where the NDP picked up most of their seats. The Liberals also took the Northwest Territories and the Yukon. The Greater Victoria, BC region went NDP and Green. Vancouver Island mainly went NDP. Now the Conservatives, they went most of the outlying regions in the interior. But when you get to Vancouver itself, it mostly went Liberal. And the Conservatives, only a few small areas, and the NDP got in a few places. And then you have the one independent in 18, which was Wilson-Rayburn. So it definitely shows the divides in Canada, and it's interesting to see how it's going to work out. I know Alberta says there's a separatist movement, but I don't think that'll ever happen. I think Albertans are more Canadian than many people living in Toronto. So the Liberals, they won 157 seats, which is minus 20 from what they won 4 years earlier. The Conservatives won 121, up by 26 seats. The Bloc Québécois won 32, which is up by 22 seats because they were almost dead. The NDP, they won 24 seats, which is down by 15. The Green Party won 3 seats and are up by 1. Independents, there were 9 independents, mainly from Liberals who crossed over. Now they're down to 1, so they lost 8 seats. Independents have a tough time. And then the People's Party, they had 1 seat because Bernier left the Conservative Party, and then they got none today. As a party, they're done. So Max Bernier vows he'll fight again. I don't know, you gotta start at the provincial level and work your way up, I think. So that's how the seats went. Now the popular vote is pretty interesting. The Conservatives actually won the popular vote of 34.4% compared to the Liberals of 33.6%. The Bloc Québécois only won 7.7% of the vote, and all that was in Quebec anyway, so it doesn't really matter. The NDP nationally went 15.92% of the vote. The Greens were 6.49%. Other parties were 0.8% of the vote. And the People's Party, they won 1.64% of the vote. Did it help split votes? Only maybe in a couple of ridings in Quebec did that work against the Conservatives and the Liberals. But for the most part, it had no bearing anywhere else. So around the world, it got published. Canada's Trudeau wins a minority government, so we have him again. Now, what does it mean to have a minority government? It just means that the Liberal Party is still in power because they have the most seats right now, unless, of course, the unholy alliance of everyone else gangs up on them. And what they can do is they can either bring in a second party, so they would have to form an alliance with something like the Bloc Québécois or the NDP. Probably the NDP would make the most sense for the Liberals because they're both on the left spectrum. They could also bring in the Greens, but the Greens don't have enough seats to actually do that. So right now, if he brings in the NDP, then he has to bring in some of the things they wanted to bring to the table. So some of their party platform, they have to make concessions towards that party to bring them on in order to get their own agendas. This is where you find out how much of a politician you can be. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to agree all the time. This kind of government doesn't usually last. Some of them only lasted 77 days. Some last 2 years. Or Trudeau and the Liberals can go do it alone and do it on a case-by-case basis. So they bring in legislation, see how well it works. They'll have to water down a lot of their proposals or up the ante, make it more extreme. If they want the Bloc Québécois and Conservatives to go with anything, they're going to have to water their proposals down, especially when it comes to the Trans-Canada Pipeline, the military, and anything to do with language and values. Immigration will also be a touchy point because neither the Conservatives or the Bloc Québécois really want that much immigration. Spending, they won't be able to spend huge amounts of money. Though if they want the NDP on board, they'll have to raise the amount they spend. It'll be deficit spending. So what happens is if in a minority government, if they lose a vote on a bill, on an important bill at that, then the opposition has the right to call a non-confidence vote. And if there's a vote of non-confidence, then the Prime Minister can then dissolve Parliament and ask for a new election to the Governor General, in which case the Governor General will either ask the next biggest party, which would be the Conservatives, to form a government. Now, the only way the Conservatives are going to form a party is if they can get the Bloc Québécois and the NDP. Well, they could try a minority government, but that would be even more shaky than the Liberals, in which case the Governor General would probably call a new election. Now, calling a new election so quickly would be expensive. I don't think the NDP could survive another election financially. You need deep pockets, and from what I understand, the NDP put their own headquarters up for sale, so it was really hard on them financially. Usually, you give it some time. So now Trudeau's got to walk the minefield with divisional regionalism and try and make everyone happy. But usually, when you try to make everyone happy, you make no one happy, and that's almost what happened this election. Trudeau really pissed off the West, the interior of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Delays with the pipeline, the plight of the canola farmers with China. So he'll have to walk that minefield. At the same time, he's got the Bloc Québécois breathing down his neck in Quebec. So it'll be interesting to see what Trudeau can pull out. According to the National Observer, he will need to win support from other parties to form a workable government that can deliver its campaign promises on climate action and affordability. So like I was saying, it says his most likely allies would be the NDP and the Greens. Now, Alberta and Saskatchewan will have no Liberal seats, therefore no representation in cabinet. I think there's only one NDP out in Saskatchewan, so Trudeau is a politician. So it's a wait and see. It'll be interesting to see how this works out. How long this minority government will last. Will it last 80 days or will it last 2 years? Will it run the whole 4-year course? Sometimes when you call an early election, it can backfire on you. Or if you force the government to call an early election, it will backfire on you. So we'll wait and see. Anyway, let me know what you thought of the election results, and until next time, I'm out of here.